module would be the definition of culture and the components of culture. And if we refer back to the last module on structural functionalism, this definition is stemming from that understanding of our institutions. So my favorite definition of culture, and you have to understand there's probably 3,052 million different definitions of culture. But the one that I like to use is that culture refers to the totality of institutional patterns in a society. That is the society's beliefs, values, and norms, along with its symbols and physical artifacts. And let's sort of break that a little bit apart. When we're talking in sociology about culture, we usually distinguish between two parts of culture. One is what we refer to as the physical or the material culture. And these are all the things that we can touch. Our clothing, our cars, our houses, our food, all of these things would be our physical artifacts or part of our material culture. The other aspect of our culture is what we refer to as the non-material culture, or things that we can't necessarily see or touch. Although sometimes our physical aspects of culture or our material culture, we can infer things about our non-material culture. And the non-material culture would be the society's beliefs, values, and norms, things that we really can't see, that we really can't touch. And when I think about the non-material culture, we are really referring to this as the cultural ideology, sort of the vagueness that we can't necessarily see. But let me just give you an example of this. If we were looking at some of the material culture or the physical artifacts that we find around ourselves, we can begin to look at cars, for example. And when I say Volkswagen, you probably automatically thought about the type of people that would drive a Volkswagen. I think of people that are younger. Actually, when I'm seeing people driving the Volkswagens today, I'm seeing older people that are yuppies, hippie wannabes, actually, or throwbacks from the hippies and that. And if we look at vans, for example, you would also find that we probably automatically associate that these people driving the minivans would be soccer moms, people with kids, women with kids. And so a lot of times when we are looking at buildings, we're inferring things about that building and getting a sense of whether we like that building or we don't like that building. And that's based on some of our own beliefs, values, and norms that we associate within that physical structure. Anyway, when we think about all of these things put together, the beliefs, values, and norms, and we'll discuss those in a minute, when we think about culture, culture is really providing us with a way of life. It tells us what we're supposed to be doing, how we're supposed to be doing, if we're supposed to be doing something, and using what type of material. And when we look at our modern societies, when we look at the United States, for example, we can also say that it actually houses many different cultures and subcultures. When I look at being a sociologist, I dress in a particular way. I don't have to wear a lab coat. And that's not a part of my dress. It's not a part of my material culture to wear a lab coat to class. I just wear my nice, comfortable clothes, as I call them. And if we look at some people that might be teaching in the business areas, they tend to dress up more with a three-piece suit or a two-piece suit with a tie. Or the women might come in a dress with nice nylons, which I can't stand. So I'm lucky to be a sociologist because I don't have to dress up. I can come in my jeans if I so choose. So that's one of the nice things about being a sociologist. And a lot of times when we think about sociology, and being a sociologist, I actually have been provided a way of life, a way of thinking about the world around me just based on that cultural subgroup. Being a woman also provides me with a different way of looking at my society and how I view different aspects of what I'm supposed to do or not do. And as we get into a little bit further into this, as we start to really chart our cultural background of the United States, we'll see some of that emerging as we go back to those institutions that we talked about in the last module and really look at the different functions and the messages that we receive on how we're going to accomplish those different functions for our society. What I'd like to do now is begin to talk a little bit more in depth about what it means to have the components of culture. So what we're going to discuss is what we mean by norms, values, and beliefs, and how those get into our head. So these would be what I would refer to as the components of culture. The components of culture would be our norms, the sanctions, the values, and the beliefs that we have as a people within the United States. And we're going to begin with norms, and I always look at these three as sort of going almost like a funnel, where the norms are very, very specific and the beliefs are very general. And so when we think about norms, norms are expected patterns of behavior. These are actual things that we can observe in other people. We can see whether they're driving on the right side of the road or if they're driving on the left side of the road. We can determine whether they're running red lights or not running red lights. These are all expected patterns of behavior. I always like to think about driving because many of us have different expectations about how people are to drive or not to drive. For example, if you think about the speed limit and we think about the normative behavior of people on the speed limit, obviously we have a posted sign that might say 35 miles per hour. But we also know that hardly anybody goes 35 miles per hour. They usually are 5 miles over the speed limit. So that's almost like an informal norm. It's an expected pattern of behavior. And when people aren't going 5 miles over the speed limit, we get angry because we're expecting them to go 5 miles over the speed limit. And God forbid they go 5 miles under the speed limit. Okay, so when we begin to think about different ways that people drive and the way you drive versus the way other people drive, we can get really into some of our expected patterns of behavior. Now with this, we can also say norms are a little bit different. We had talked previously about statuses, and those are our positions within our social structure, being a mother, being a nurse, being a professor. And the roles associated with those statuses are very specific. For example, if I'm looking at my status as professor, I'm expected to do particular things. It might be I need to be in class, although fortunately now we're moving into an online environment, so now I have different expectations about what I'm supposed to do. But generally you expect your professors to be on time, you expect your professors to do some grading, you expect your professors to be intelligent. So those are specific roles or expected behaviors that we associate with somebody of a particular status. For police officers, we expect them to sit on the highway and wait and clock people who are speeding. We expect to see police officers in Dunkin' Donuts. That's some of our cultural expectations about what police officers do. When we get into norms, we are really applying the idea of roles more broadly across statuses. So when we look at normative behaviors, then we are expecting, regardless of your status, that you're going to follow some particular behavior. In the United States, we all drive on the right side of the road. In Barbados and England and the Bahamas, they all drive on the left side of the road. And that's what's expected in those particular countries. And it doesn't matter who we are, whether we're a mother or a father or a lawyer or a police officer, we're all expected to drive on the right side of the road. We're all expected to stop at red lights. We're all expected to stop at stop signs. We're all expected, if we move into another area in terms of personal hygiene. In the good old United States, we don't like people who stink, so we have high standards of personal hygiene, and we have a whole lot of ideas about what it is to be clean. And when we smell body odor from some other person, we don't think that they're clean. So these are the ideas with the norms in terms of we have particular expectations of people and how they're going to behave. And when they don't behave as we expect, then we're sort of caught off guard and we have to ask ourselves, well, why are they not acting like we would expect them to act? So when we think about norms, norms are, we have so many norms. All of our laws, whether they be federal, state, or local laws, would be considered norms. These would be considered formal norms, according to sociologists, where we have some formal punishment from an agency who might catch us. If we were speeding, for example, we would get a ticket if we get caught. So the formal norms are associated mainly with all of our laws that we have, either the federal, state, or local government. But what's even more interesting are all the informal norms, norms that we have for people that are not written down but are communicated almost orally or through visual means. For example, all our driving would be probably, most of those would be considered legal, so formal norms. But when we start thinking about some other norms of behavior, for example, we don't like it when people pick their nose. Well, that's an informal norm, and people are corrected by their parents, oh, don't pick your nose, and we talked about that a little bit earlier too. Or we don't see very many people in adulthood sucking their thumbs. So we learn particular behaviors as we're interacting with other people around us to show us how we're supposed to behave. Even if we look at, as we go to malls and we're walking the mall, there's usually a general pattern that we see. If you're real observant, you'll see the pattern that most people, when they're walking in a mall, are having their right shoulder closest to the store. And then we know that they're walking in the right direction. Or if you're walking in the hallway and you come to a doorway, you're going to go through the right door rather than the left door, because that's what's expected. And when somebody goes through the left door and somebody's coming in the left door, or what would be their right door, then it gets confusing and a little bit of chaos exists. So somebody has to apologize because somebody broke that norm of behavior. So norms are a lot of what we do in terms of how we expect to behave, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of norms, even if we start to think about food and how we eat our food and what type of food we eat. In the United States, we don't eat monkey brains, but in other countries, that's a delicacy, and it's considered appropriate to eat monkey brains. Some places will eat guinea pigs, and most of us don't feel that that's expected behavior pattern. We eat cows and we eat lamb if we're lucky, or maybe not so lucky, I don't know. We eat chicken, we eat fish, we eat vegetables. Okay? And if we went over to India and we expect to get a nice, good beef hamburger, we're probably going to be out of luck. Because in India, the cow is sacred and they don't eat beef, and they think that we're probably pretty silly for eating all this beef. So when we think about the types of food we eat, how we eat it, how we prepare it, I've never seen anybody fry lettuce as of yet. Even if I say, well, how about a peanut butter and pickle sandwich? Most people go, ew. So we have definite expectations about when we're supposed to eat particular things and when we're not. My husband always liked to give the kids Oreos for breakfast, and I always used to get mad at him because he was giving them something that wasn't nutritious. And so I wanted him to give them something a little bit better than Oreos, but then I would go out and what would I buy? Donuts? Donuts and Oreos. What's the difference between donuts and Oreos if you're eating them for breakfast? Breakfast of champions, right? Regardless of which one you eat, you're not having a very nutritious breakfast. So a lot of times it's how we're raised and what we think is appropriate or inappropriate as we move into eating behaviors and so on and so forth. Hopefully you can see now that when we think about norms, there's thousands, as I said, thousands and thousands of different expected behaviors that we have of other people as we interact with other people. And when we think about these norms and how we expect people to behave, one of the things we do is that we have something that we refer to as sanctions. How do we know that people are going to behave the way we want them to behave? And most of the time, we ensure that they're going to behave as we expect them to behave if we give them what's referred to as a sanction. So some type of reward or punishment for behaving as we expect them to behave. So when we think about kids, when we're trying to train kids, or socialize kids would be the nicer term, we are always trying to reward or punish them for doing appropriate or inappropriate behavior. For example, if we're trying to teach our kids not to eat with their hands, we're going to reward them when they use the fork and the spoon appropriately. And then we are going to get angry and we might sanction them or yell at them when they're not using the food or the spoon and the fork appropriately, and they're just picking up their nice little food with their hands, which is certainly much easier than manipulating the utensils. When we think about driving, going back to our driving example, when you're sitting at a red light and the red light changes to green and you don't go fast enough, you get a sanction. And most of you should have automatically thought about what that sanction was, which is somebody honking their horn at you behind you. And a lot of times you can tell what type of punishment they're giving you. Is it just a reminder honk, which is a nice honk? Or is it one of those nice little obnoxious honks that go on for about 5 minutes? And I always think about, if it's an obnoxious honk, wouldn't it be fun just to sit at the light until the light's just about ready to turn red again, and then you go, and then the other person's sort of stuck behind you at the red light again? So then you can sort of punish the other person for being so obnoxious about how they're honking at you. And so when we're thinking about all of these nice little things that we do for people, when we're looking at all of the informal norms, things that we're not formally punished for, we usually will get dirty looks for people. Sometimes people will provide us with a nice little hand gesture, letting us know that we did something incorrectly. Sometimes people will yell and scream at us if we don't do something appropriately. Most people probably are familiar with the timeout chair when children don't behave appropriately, and sort of learning the nice little rules of our culture. We can also have rewards. It's not just a matter of punishment, but also rewards for behaviors that we want to see in people. And actually it's unfortunate because I think we tend to use more forms of punishment than we do in terms of rewarding behavior that we want. So instead of putting children in timeout all the time, it might be that they were seeking our attention, and if we just gave them a different option, they might have been able to change their behavior. I think about kids who might be banging on pots and pans or banging on cabinet doors, and it might be that it's driving you crazy, and what you need to do is find an alternative to let the child know that, well, you know, you can continue to bang on the pots and pans, or you can go and do something else. And then a lot of times the child will go and do something else because they know that they're going to get into trouble if they can continue to have that type of behavior. So sometimes kids don't always know different ways to behave, and if we give them different options, sometimes they'll pick the better option and stay out of trouble. I always also thought that when I'm driving, it would be nice if I got rewarded for good driving. I might actually drive a little bit better if I was pulled over and say, gee, you stopped at that stop sign, you're going the right speed limit, you're staying the right amount of space between you and the other car. Here's $100. Wouldn't that be nice if we got rewarded instead of punished when we got caught speeding or doing something wrong? I would drive better. I would. So those are sanctions. As I said, some sanctions are formal and official. When we get caught breaking the laws, for example, those would be our formal sanctions. And others are definitely more informal, where we're getting dirty looks or we don't get a pay raise. You know, it's something that isn't so involved with agency that is going to punish us. The third component of culture is actually our values, and norms are justified by our values. And when I ask people when they're behaving, well, why are you behaving this particular way? So if we think about our driving, and I say to you, why are you driving on the right side of the road? Why don't you drive on the left side of the road? And most people say, well, it's the law, and that's certainly the case, but if we dig a little bit deeper, eventually we find out, well, I want to be safe. I don't want to have an accident. And so values are really a matter of preference. So what do we prefer over something else? We prefer to be safe than unsafe, and so they're really representing our view about what's better than what. It's better to be safe than unsafe, plain and simple. And it's really sometimes hard and difficult to get to the values of a particular norm, but remember, when we see people behaving in a particular way, and if we continue to ask them, why are they doing this? Well, that's the way it's always been done. When you hear responses like this, we can infer then that this behavior has been what we refer to as institutionalized or accepted by the majority of the culture because everybody does it this way. And we've always done it this way. So it's a matter of preference, cultural preference, when we get into the values, what we prefer and what we think is better than what. When we think about marriage here in the United States, we think that monogamy is better than polygamy. That is, that we think that it's better to have a man and woman married together rather than a man married to multiple wives or a woman married to multiple husbands. Although I think that's really crazy. Don't know why anybody would want to do that, but you know, there's some countries that actually have that pattern. But that's our matter of preference. We think that having monogamous relationships is better than having polygamous relationships, and our whole structure is set up that way. So whenever we're dating, for example, and we find that people have multiple partners, then I think that there's usually a lot of conflict. I know that there's some agreement sometimes among people to date other people, but I guarantee you, and eventually that's going to run into a lot of difficulties because we're having that expectation that we're supposed to be monogamous and true to one person and one person only. And even if we look this past summer with some of the things happening with the Mormon church, the fundamental Mormon church, with the one person being arrested for practicing polygamy, we can see that most people find that lifestyle as unacceptable. And actually all of our laws in all of the states prohibit polygamy from actually occurring. Doesn't mean that 100% of our population is actually buying into that, but for the most part, you know, we have the majority of the people that say that this is the better way to do things. And that's good, and we'll come to that in the next module when we talk a little bit about why these things are actually really good to have when we think about them. And finally, when we think about beliefs, our values are justified by beliefs. So when we think about going back to our driving example, if we start to think about, well, everybody drives on the right side of the road, why do they do that? Well, it's because I want to be safe. Well, why do you want to be safe? Well, the answer to this is, I don't want to be dead. And we can probably put that back into some of the beliefs of our founding fathers. We value life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we have to be alive in order to pursue our liberty and pursue our happiness. And so this is a belief. It's a very vague thing. It's not specific, and it can apply for many different areas when we start to look at our values and when we begin to look at our norms. So beliefs are very vague, and they can help us justify our values. Well, why do you think that this is the better way of doing something? Well, because of this particular belief, and I'll sort of summarize this in a minute. But the idea here is that our beliefs are very general, they are not very specific, and because of this, these are things that it's our views about what is absolutely 100% true. And so when we think about this, a lot of our beliefs stem from our religious belief system. If we look at how our Constitution was written, you can see God exists within our Constitution and some of the way the founding fathers put the United States together. And so these are what we believe to be true. So when we think about equality in the United States, that's a truth. We believe that everybody should be treated equally. We believe that everybody should be free. We believe in democracy, in other words. We believe that everybody has the right to choose what they want to do with their lives. So these are views about what is absolutely 100% true in the mind of an individual. And these beliefs are very, very difficult to change. And it's almost, I know some of you, if you don't believe in God, have tried to convince other people who believe in God that there is no God. It's almost impossible. Yeah, it's almost not even worth the debate. And vice versa, if you believe in God and you know somebody that doesn't believe in God and trying to convince them that there is a God, again, this is what people believe to be true. And it's very difficult for people to change their minds when they know it is absolutely true. And again, most of our beliefs are coming from our religious belief system, whether we be Christian, Islam, Jewish, Hindu. It all stems from where we're coming and where we're viewing things. And so this becomes really important for us to understand because the beliefs are going to drive us, and it's driving our culture. It's determining how we're going to, what values we're going to have, what preferences we have, and then that's going to determine how we're going to behave. So if we sum up this, beliefs are ideas that a particular people or a society have and that they understand to be absolutely true. Because of this, our beliefs are going to evoke strong emotions when we argue about them. And beliefs can be so strong that people are willing to die for their beliefs. And we see that when we look at the terrorist attacks of 9/11. We can say that those individuals were willing to die for their belief, and their belief was that the United States and the people of the United States are inherently evil. We've also seen suicide bombers, other than just those of 9/11. We saw in World War II kamikaze pilots from Japan that were willing to die for their beliefs. And a lot of times when we look at our military personnel, they are willing to die for their beliefs as well, that they are fighting for freedom and democracy and to keep the people of the United States safe. So these belief systems, whatever our belief systems are, and we're going to explore what our beliefs are in the United States in a couple modules hence. And these beliefs help shape our country, our society, our culture. And beliefs help people choose alternative ways of adapting to their environment. We talked a little bit about Edward T. Hall in that our culture is really the way that we're adapting to our environment and solving our problems and that we might have. If we believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, these beliefs will justify our values, the values that we will come to agree on. And if we believe in life, liberty, if we believe in life, for example, we might prefer that women not have abortions, or we might prefer that we don't go to war, or we might prefer that there should not be a death penalty. If we believe in liberty, which is freedom on the other hand, then we would prefer that women have the freedom to choose whether they have an abortion or not, that people should be able to practice their preferred religion, even if it is a satanic cult, for example. And so when we begin to look at many of our values or preferences, they are really emerging from our belief systems. Which one are we putting emphasis on? Further, once our values or preferences are chosen, then they justify our norms or how we expect people to behave. If we prefer not to have the death penalty, if we're believing in life, then we would expect to be excused from the jury that was trying a case with the death penalty. I know I certainly wouldn't want to serve on such a jury. It might be that we would go out and demonstrate when somebody was going to be put to death at one of the prisons. If we think it is inappropriate to go to war, then we would expect to move to Canada to avoid being drafted, or we register as a conscientious objector, or we protest the war. So there's many different ways then that we can look at behaviors stemming from these particular beliefs, and they can be very contradictory as we move from our beliefs into different values. So because the beliefs are so vague, it can usually support a lot of different types of values and sometimes contradictory values. Obviously, beliefs have a major impact on how a society operates, and beliefs are going to govern the values and norms found throughout a society and the society's social structure. And when we come back to thinking about these ideas of beliefs, values, and norms, we're going to apply those to the social structure as we outlined with the structural functionalist perspective. As we start to think about how and what rules, in essence, that's what our values and norms are, our rules of behavior, our way of life, our book of how we're going to behave. If we begin to look back at that table we talked about last time, and then we can begin to understand that when we talk about the functions of the family and we have to think about how we're going to regulate reproduction. Well, when we start thinking about all the rules that we have about how we're going to regulate sexual behavior, for example, we are actually talking about the norms and the values that we have as a society regarding sexual behavior. And so when we begin to chart this for the United States, you'll see that we have lots of rules, and we'll be using that in a few modules. Next time we're going to talk a little bit about ethnocentrism and cultural relativity and how those apply to these ideas.